So what a beautiful and fascinating story we just heard about a holy visit, generous hospitality, and a blessing beyond imagination to a couple who have been promised the gift of this pregnancy and a child for a very long time, according to the text since chapter 11 and 12 in Genesis, when we are first introduced to Abram and Sarai. And there is a story here that we could explore about how we have to follow God's will and trust in God's promises, not expecting them on our timetable or in the way we expect them, but waiting patiently for God. There's even a warning here in this portion of the story about what happens when we let anxiety get the better of us and push our interpretations and try to force things the way we think they need to go. But that's for another day and another time. Today, I want to look at a parable of two men. Our reading often isn't heard like that. Instead, they are heard as two distinct and separate stories cordoned off in their own display, but they're not meant to be, because these two stories lay back to back in our biblical text. And like many stories we hear from Jesus in the New Testament, we can see from the setup that we are supposed to compare and contrast these two stories. And I'll bet you will know the second one when it comes up, but don't trust that you know what it means. Jesus does this same thing in his parables when he introduces stories to say, there are two people, or usually there are two men, one who is rich and one who is poor. Right? One who took their inheritance and one who didn't. Or one group who had the oil for their lamps and one who didn't. We are meant to compare and contrast. And so likewise, we have two men here, one named Abraham and one named Lot. Their story, as with Abram and Sarai's, actually begin much earlier in Genesis, specifically in Genesis 11. There we learn that Lot is Abraham's nephew from his brother Nahor. And we learn that Lot travels a lot with his uncle Abram. And that's true until it becomes impossible. And so I'm going to ask anyone that might to pull out your Bible. And the first book in the Bible is Genesis. And we are looking for Genesis 13, 1 through 13. Again, Genesis 13, 1 through 13. And if someone gets it and is willing to read it, I would appreciate it. Genesis 13, 1 through 13. Do you have it, Bill? Great. 1 through 13. You got it? Thank you, Bill.
So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He turned his eye on by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not support both of them living together, because their possessions were so great and could not live together. This strife arose between the leaders of Abram's livestock and the herders of livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzonites lived in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Lot looked about him and saw that the plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord.
Oh, you didn't know we were going there, did you? But I told you, you have an idea in your mind about what that story is about, and I'm about to tell it to you a little differently. There is some serious foreshadowing happening here. A setup, a fork in the road. One goes one way, one goes the other. Abraham is going where? Did anyone hear? Abraham is going to Canaan. That's right. And Lot is going to Sodom. Good listening. So we are in dun, 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 dun. While Canaan, Abraham sets up this camp at the Oaks of Mamre. And that is where we met him in chapter 18, where some 25 years have passed, and he and Sarai are still waiting for that promised child that God had said would be a sign of their covenant and would begin the multiple generations that were to come through Abraham, but he still doesn't have a son through his elderly, now very elderly wife, Sarah. And so our tale begins. Once upon a time. One day. As Abraham was out setting by the trees, he saw 3 men approach. So he runs out to meet them and invites them to stay and to rest and to eat. And it is very clear in the story that these aren't just your typical visitors. Who do you think these visitors are? Angels. What else do you think? Maybe even God themselves. Right? There's something very special. And so what does Abraham do? He offers them to come in. That's right. He cooks them dinner. He says, get flour. And he says, get 3 measures of flour. Now, how many of you are cooks? Who makes bread in here? Anyone? All right, I got a couple people. Now, if I asked you to make some bread, how much flour might you need? 3 cups. But you know what? A measure is not a cup. A measure in Hebrew is a seah. And each seah is about 2 gallons of flour. So he has asked for 6 gallons of flour. Now I'm really trusting, is Pat still back there somewhere? Pat, I need your attention here. Fatted calf. If we were to kill a side of beef, or a deer, or whatever animal you want, how many meals might you get out of an entire animal? Meals. How long would that feed your family? 4 months. A family of 5. He is preparing this for how many people? 3. This is like the feeding of 5,000, except it is for 3. It is abundance on top of abundance. Generosity and hospitality abound. And not only that, Abraham washes their feet, gives them rest, gets out of his own seat to let them sit down. I think Abraham has read Miss Emily Post, and he knows how to make people feel welcome. And it was during this meal, as they sat under this tree, that the long-awaited, almost impossible to imagine promise finally came to pass. Do you remember what that angel said in the reading that we heard? And we can find it in chapter 18, verse 10. What's going to happen? She's going to have a son. She's going to have a baby. And how did Sarah respond? She laughed. Okay, women. If you were 89 years old and God said you were going to have a baby, I think that is laughter, tears, and just about everything else, and I'm not sure that those tears are all joyful. I think that's the laughter that we heard from Sarah that day. Are you freaking kidding me? But we know that it does come to pass according to the story. Sarah does bear Isaac, and then Isaac begets Jacob, and Jacob begins the 12 tribes of Israel. But I don't want to jump that far. We need to look at that other man. Remember the other man I mentioned? Lot? Lot is still hanging out. He's over in Sodom. And the angels, in the very next verse, if we look at chapter 16, in that very next verse, it tells us that then the men set out from there, and he looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them on their way. On their way. And then we are treated to a very interesting conversation between God and the angels, where God tells Abraham what he has planned for Sodom and Gomorrah. Because unlike the fine treatment that the angels received by Abraham, there is news that these cities are cruel and violent and selfish and inhospitable. They are so far from God's ways. God says that they are sinning, because that's what sin means, separate from God. And God is done with it. And so God is intent on destroying the cities. But Abraham objects. Do you know what Abraham says? Abraham says in chapter 18, verse 23 through 33, well, wait a minute. What if there were 50 good people in that town? Would you save it? And what do you think God says? He says, sure, okay. And Abraham, knowing he had gotten a little bit of reprieve, says, you know what he says? How about if there's 45? Would you save a city if there were 45 good people? Sure. Does Abraham stop there? How about 30? How about 20? And then Abraham dares. He's like, boy, am I pushing this with God, but I'm going to ask one more time. What if there are 10 good people in the city? Will you save them? That's right. That's right. And so at this point, Abraham and God recede, and the two angels arrive in Sodom, where, surprise, surprise, who's sitting by the gate? Lot. Lot is sitting there with his thumbs, do-do-do-do-do, and here come the angels. Now Lot, just like his uncle Abram, says, come into my house, let me feed you, let me take care of you. And the angels say, no, we're going to go to the town square. And Lot goes, ooh, I know this place. You don't want to go there. Please, come with me. Come to my house. And he, just like his uncle, makes a marvelous feast. We don't know how much flour or how many fatted calves, but it is called a feast. And just as they all push back from the table and get their after-dinner drink or coffee or maybe even some cheesecake, who knows, the crowd of townspeople come and surround the house and insist that Lot turns over these foreigners. And it is clear that they are not asking them to a neighborhood party. They do not want to say, hello, how are you, where'd you come from, tell me about it. They are like robbers on the side of a road. They are cruel and mean. And it is important for you to know something that we don't necessarily recognize in our Bible, because it's not in our 10 Commandments, but it is repeated over and over and over in the Hebrew text that there are 3 classes of people that everyone is told to care for. Do you know who they are? Anyone? The widow, the orphan, and the sojourner. The sojourner, sometimes referred to as the alien. And we are told, remember, you were once aliens too. And it is incumbent on those who have to protect those who do not have, and those that don't have a voice. Thus Lot says, what? Don't go out there, right? Don't go out there. Stay here. And then he offers the absolute unthinkable to our ears, but I want you to remember that this story is told in hyperbole. We didn't use 3 cups of flour. We used 55 cups of flour. We didn't make enough dinner for one person. We made dinner for 5,000. And so in hyperbole, I think we are supposed to understand that Lot offers his daughters. But the crowd is not satisfied, and so they start to bother Lot himself. And instead of Lot being one of them and part of this neighborhood, they start to get angry and they start to say, "You aren't one of us. You don't belong here. You came here late. You're not one of us." And they start to beat up Lot. They start to be angry with him, and the angels grab him and pull him back into the house to save him. And then they make the town go blind. Now, this blindness is not just real, but it is also metaphorical, because they could not see, but they also couldn't understand. They couldn't understand what they had just done by offering to harm Lot. Because do you remember that conversation we just talked about with Abraham? How many good people do we need? Right? We have whittled God down to just looking for one good person. And what did the town just do? They just othered that one good person. They had disfellowshipped him. And the person that could have saved that town and those people, the one who still remembered what decency and hospitality and kindness was otherized. And it was said they weren't part of them. And so you know what the angels did at that point? They gathered up Lot, and they gathered up his wife and his daughters, and they pressed them out of town. And as they left town, the city was destroyed because they could not even muster 10 good people. This wasn't just a story of two men. This is a story of two places, a tale of two cities, as it were. One where kindness ruled and hospitality was the norm, even unto ridiculousness, and another where there wasn't even a good man to save it. And the people were so mean, so selfish, and so short-sighted, they even tried to kill the very man who came to save them. That sounds familiar this week, doesn't it? Classifying him too as a foreigner rather than a neighbor. So having heard these two tales, I wonder what you think of the communities that you are a part of your family, this church, your hometown, the nation, the world. Which of these cities are we? Which of these cities do we want to be? If an angel came to the door as a beggar, a foreigner, another, whatever that might look like to you, how would you respond? How would we respond? I leave it to you to ponder that question this week. Amen.